When you think of World War II aviation, certain images immediately come to mind. The distinctive scream of a diving Stuka, the sleek profile of a Messerschmitt slicing through the clouds, the revolutionary jet engines of the Me-262 rewriting the rules of aerial combat. But the story of German aviation during the Second World War goes far beyond these legendary machines. Over the course of 6 brutal years, Germany deployed more than 80 different aircraft types, each with its own purpose, its own story, and its own contribution to one of history's most devastating conflicts. Today, we're going to explore every single one of them, from the fighters that battled for supremacy in the skies, to the bombers that rained destruction below, to the transports that kept armies supplied, and even the experimental helicopters and rocket planes that seemed to belong more to science fiction than reality. Some of these aircraft changed the course of the war. Others were spectacular failures, and a few were so advanced they wouldn't see their full potential realized until decades after the war ended. This is the complete story of German aviation in World War II. Chapter 1. Fighters and Interceptors. Let's begin where air superiority was won and lost, with the fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 109. If there's one aircraft that defined German air power, it's the Messerschmitt Bf 109. This wasn't just a fighter, it was the fighter of the Luftwaffe, serving from the very first day of the war in Poland to the final desperate defense of Berlin in 1945. The 109 went through constant evolution. Early models proved themselves in the Spanish Civil War. The E variant dominated the skies over France. The F series refined the design to near perfection, and the late war G and K models pushed performance to extremes, even as Allied fighters began to match and exceed their capabilities. Over 33,000 were built, more than any other fighter in history. Pilots flew it on every front, from the frozen wastes of the Eastern Front to the burning deserts of North Africa, from the Battle of Britain to the defense of the Reich itself. Focke-Wulf FW 190. If the 109 was the workhorse, the Focke-Wulf FW 190 was the warhorse. Allied pilots who first encountered it in 1941 were shocked. Here was a German fighter that could outperform the Spitfire in almost every category. They called it the butcher bird, and with good reason. Unlike the liquid-cooled 109, the FW 190 used a powerful radial engine that could absorb tremendous battle damage and keep flying. It was more rugged, easier to maintain, and arguably the best radial engine fighter of the entire war. Kurt Tank's masterpiece gave German pilots a crucial edge when they needed it most, and variants of the 190 served in roles from ground attack to high-altitude interception. Focke-Wulf Ta-152 tank wasn't finished. His late-war Ta-152 took the 190's basic design and stretched it for high-altitude combat. With its long wings and powerful engine, it was one of the fastest piston-engine fighters ever built, capable of catching even the high-flying American B-29 had that bomber been deployed to Europe. But the TA-152 arrived too late and in too few numbers. Only a handful reached operational units before Germany collapsed. Messerschmitt Bf 110, the destroyer. Bf 110 heavy fighter, called the Zerstörer, or Destroyer, seemed like a brilliant idea on paper. A long-range, heavily armed fighter that could escort bombers and devastate enemy aircraft with its concentrated firepower. Reality proved harsh. During the Battle of Britain, the 110 was mauled by nimble single-engine British fighters. It was too slow, too heavy, too vulnerable. But rather than being scrapped, the 110 found new life as a night fighter. Equipped with radar and powerful cannons, it became the backbone of Germany's night defense, shooting down hundreds of RAF bombers over the Reich. Messerschmitt Me-210 and Me-410. The Me-210 was supposed to replace the Bf 110. Instead, it became one of Germany's greatest aviation disasters. Severe aerodynamic problems made it virtually unflyable. Production was halted, and the entire airframe was redesigned. The result was the Me-410 Hornisse, or Hornet, which solved the 210's stability issues and served effectively as both a reconnaissance platform and heavy fighter, particularly against Allied bomber formations. Messerschmitt Me-262, the jet revolution. And now we come to the aircraft that changed everything. the Me-262 Schwalbe, or Swallow. This was the world's first operational jet fighter, and it represented a quantum leap in aviation technology. Flying at speeds approaching 900 kilometers per hour, it could slash through Allied bomber formations, destroy its targets, and escape before escort fighters could react. Allied pilots flying piston-engine planes had no answer for the 262's speed. The only way to catch one was to ambush it during takeoff or landing when it was slow and vulnerable. Had the Me-262 been available in larger numbers and earlier in the war, it might have changed the outcome of the air war over Europe. As it was, over 1,400 were built, but chronic shortages of fuel, spare parts, and trained pilots meant that only a fraction ever saw combat. Heinkel, He-162, the People's Fighter. Desperation breeds innovation, and few aircraft embodied German desperation more than the Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, or People's Fighter. With resources dwindling, Germany needed a jet fighter that could be built quickly and cheaply from non-strategic materials, mainly wood. The He-162 was the answer, a tiny jet fighter designed to be mass-produced and flown by hastily trained Hitler Youth members. It was a terrible idea. The aircraft was tricky to fly, and putting inexperienced teenagers in the cockpit of a jet fighter was almost suicidal. Very few saw combat before the war ended. Messerschmitt Me-163, the rocket fighter. If the He-162 was desperate, the Me-163 Comet was absolutely insane. This was the only rocket-powered fighter to ever see operational service. Think about that for a moment. A manned rocket, not a jet, but a rocket, used as a fighter aircraft. The Comet was incredibly fast, faster than anything else in the sky, but it had an endurance of only about 8 minutes of powered flight, and its fuel, a volatile mixture of chemicals, was so dangerous that it could dissolve human tissue on contact. Ground crew had to wear protective suits, and forced landings often resulted in explosions. More Comet pilots were probably killed by their own aircraft than by enemy action, but those who mastered it and survived described it as unlike anything else, a screaming rocket ship that could climb to altitude in seconds. Bakemba 349 Natter. And if you thought the Comet was insane, let me introduce you to the Bakemba 349 Natter, or Adder. This was essentially a manned missile. The pilot would be launched vertically on a rocket sled, climb to altitude, fire his rockets at enemy bombers, then bail out while his aircraft broke apart around him. It was a suicide weapon in all but name, and thankfully for the pilots involved, the war ended before it saw significant use. Heinkel He-219 Uhu. Let's end this section on a more successful note with the Heinkel He-219 Uhu, or Owl. This was arguably the most effective dedicated night fighter in the Luftwaffe. With its radar, powerful armament, and excellent handling characteristics, the He-219 was devastatingly effective against RAF night bombers. It was also the first German aircraft fitted with ejection seats, a revolutionary safety feature. Dornier-Du 335 File. Finally, we have the extraordinary Dornier-Du 335 File, or Arrow. With its unique push-pull engine configuration, one engine in the nose pulling and another in the tail pushing, the Du 335 was the fastest piston-engine aircraft Germany ever built. It was a remarkable machine that came too late to make a difference. Chapter 2. Bombers and Attack Aircraft. Now let's turn to the aircraft that brought the war to the enemy, the bombers. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. No aircraft is more synonymous with the German Blitzkrieg than the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. That name, Stuka, comes from Sturzkampfflugzeug, literally dive combat aircraft. And the Stuka's most terrifying feature wasn't its bombs, it was its sound. Fitted with sirens called Jericho trumpets, the Stuka's dive was accompanied by a rising scream that terrorized troops below. In the early campaigns in Poland, France, and the Low Countries, the Stuka was devastatingly effective, providing precision close air support that helped German tanks and infantry punch through enemy lines. But the Stuka had a fatal flaw. It was slow and vulnerable. During the Battle of Britain, Stukas were slaughtered by RAF fighters. After that, they were relegated to ground attack roles on the Eastern Front, where air superiority could be maintained. Junkers Ju-88. If the Stuka was specialized, the Junkers Ju-88 was the definition of versatility. This aircraft served as a level bomber, dive bomber, torpedo bomber, night fighter, reconnaissance platform, and heavy fighter. It was fast, adaptable, and reliable. Over 15,000 were built in dozens of variants, making it one of Germany's most important aircraft of the war. The Ju-88 proved that a well-designed airframe could be adapted to almost any role, and it served with distinction from 1939 to 1945. Junkers Ju-188. The Ju-188 was an evolutionary development of the 88, featuring improved engines and a distinctive new glazed nose. It offered better performance but never fully replaced its predecessor. Dornier Do-17, the flying pencil. The Dornier Do-17, nicknamed the Flying Pencil due to its slender fuselage, was one of Germany's primary medium bombers in the early war. It relied on speed rather than defensive armament for survival, a strategy that worked in 1939 but became increasingly untenable as Allied fighters improved. Dornier Do-17. The Do-17 was larger and more powerful than the Do-17, carrying heavier bomb loads and serving in multiple roles including level bombing, anti-shipping strikes, and even as a night fighter. Heinkel He-111. With its distinctive greenhouse nose, the Heinkel He-111 is one of the most recognizable aircraft of the early Luftwaffe. Like the Do-17, the He-111 was designed as a fast, medium bomber that could outrun fighters. And like the Do-17, it discovered that speed alone wasn't enough once it faced determined opposition during the Battle of Britain. But the He-111 proved adaptable. It served throughout the war in bombing, transport, and even as a launching platform for V-1 flying bombs against Britain. Heinkel Hu-177. Greif, the He-177 Greif, or Griffin, was Germany's attempt at a heavy strategic bomber, and it was plagued with problems from the start. The most serious issue was its unusual engine configuration. To reduce drag, two engines were paired together in each nacelle, driving a single propeller. This created horrific cooling problems and resulted in frequent engine fires that earned the aircraft a terrible reputation. Despite these issues, the He-177 was the only true long-range heavy bomber Germany deployed, and when it worked, it was effective. Arado R-234 Blitz. The Arado R-234 Blitz, or Lightning, was another revolutionary jet aircraft, the world's first operational jet bomber. So fast that Allied fighters couldn't intercept it, the R-234 flew reconnaissance missions over Britain with impunity and conducted bombing raids that couldn't be stopped. Had it been available earlier and in greater numbers, it could have changed the strategic bombing campaign entirely. Henschel HS-123. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the Henschel HS-123, a biplane dive bomber that was already obsolete when the war began. Yet this rugged aircraft kept serving until 1944, valued for its incredible toughness and its ability to operate from rough, front-line airstrips on the Eastern Front. Henschel HS-129. The HS-129 was purpose-built for one mission, destroying Soviet tanks. Heavily armored and often carrying massive 30mm or even 75mm cannons, the HS-129 was a flying tank killer that Soviet armor crews learned to fear. Focke-Wulf FW-190F and FW-190G. We discussed the FW-190 as a fighter, but dedicated ground attack variants, the F and G models, served as armored Schlachtflieger, or battle aircraft, delivering bombs and rockets against ground targets while shrugging off anti-aircraft fire. Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor. Winston Churchill called the FW-200 Condor the scourge of the Atlantic, and with good reason. Originally designed as a civilian airliner, the Condor was converted into a long-range maritime patrol bomber. Flying from bases in France and Norway, Condors hunted Allied convoys, sinking ships and, crucially, directing U-boats to their targets. The Condor made the Atlantic a far more dangerous place for Allied shipping. Chapter 3. Transport and utility aircraft wars aren't won by fighters and bombers alone. Armies need supplies, commanders need transportation, and wounded need evacuation. That's where transport aircraft come in. Junkers Ju-52. The Junkers Ju-52, affectionately called Tante Ju or Anti-Junkers, was the backbone of German air transport. This tri-motor workhorse carried troops, supplies, and evacuated wounded from every theater of the war. It dropped paratroopers over Crete and Norway, supplied the trapped army at Stalingrad, and kept German forces in North Africa supplied across the Mediterranean. Slow, vulnerable, and utterly essential, the Ju-52 was one of the most important aircraft Germany deployed. Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant. The Me 323 Gigant, or Giant, was one of the most impressive and terrifying transport aircraft of the war. With 6 engines and a cargo capacity large enough to carry a light tank, the Gigant could transport enormous loads, but it was also slow and virtually defenseless. Allied fighters slaughtered them over the Mediterranean, and they became known as meat bombers to their crews. Fieseler Fi 156 Storch. At the opposite end of the size spectrum was the Fieseler Fi 156 Storch, or Stork. This remarkable aircraft could take off and land in impossibly short distances, almost hovering in a headwind. It was perfect for liaison duties, delivering commanders to frontline positions and evacuating wounded from areas where larger aircraft couldn't operate. The Storch became legendary, with one famously used to rescue Mussolini from his mountaintop prison in a daring raid. Chapter 4. Reconnaissance and Maritime Aircraft. Intelligence wins wars, and reconnaissance aircraft provided that intelligence. Focke-Wulf FW-189. The FW-189 was nicknamed the Flying Eye for good reason. Its twin-boom design with an extensively glazed central nacelle gave the crew an exceptional view of the battlefield below. Operating primarily on the Eastern Front, the FW-189 provided German ground commanders with vital tactical intelligence. Arado R-234B. We've already discussed the R-234 as a bomber, but it also served as a reconnaissance platform. Flying too fast for interception, it photographed Allied positions and preparations with impunity. Blohm and Voss BV-138. The BV-138, nicknamed the Flying Shoe due to its unique shape, was a tri-motor flying boat vital for long-range maritime patrol over the Atlantic. Blohm and Voss BV-222. Wiking the BV-22. Wiking, or Viking, was a colossal flying boat, one of the largest aircraft of the war. It served almost exclusively as a long-range maritime transport. Arado R-196. The R-196 was the standard catapult-launched seaplane aboard German warships. Remarkably, this reconnaissance aircraft was so effective that it successfully engaged and destroyed Allied submarines and patrol vessels. Chapter 5. Gliders, Trainers, and Experimental Aircraft. DFS-230. The DFS-230 assault glider became famous for its role in the daring raid on the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael, where German airborne troops landed directly on top of the fortification in a silent glider assault. Messerschmitt Me-321. The Me-321 was the largest glider of the war, capable of carrying 200 troops or heavy equipment. Its size created problems, requiring multiple tow aircraft or specially modified tugs. Training Aircraft Germany maintained an extensive training program with aircraft like the Bücher Bu-131 Jungmann and Bu-133 Jungmeister, exceptional primary and aerobatic trainers that helped create the skilled cadre of Luftwaffe pilots, helicopters, and autogyros. Finally, we come to some of the most experimental aircraft of the war. The Focke-Achilles FA-223 was a pioneering twin-rotor helicopter that demonstrated impressive capabilities but was built in tiny numbers. The Flettner FL-282 used a revolutionary synchronized rotor system and was deployed on warships for observation. Most unusual of all was the Focke-Achilles FR-330, a small collapsible autogyro kite deployed by U-boats to provide aerial observation while surfaced far out in the Atlantic. From the first fighters that swept Polish skies in September 1939 to the jets desperately defending Berlin in April 1945, German aircraft tell the story of a nation's air power rising to domination and falling to defeat. Some, like the Bf-109 and Ju-87, became symbols of blitzkrieg. Others, like the Ma-262 and R-234, showed glimpses of a future that wouldn't fully arrive until decades later. And some, like the Ma-163 and Ba-349, demonstrated the desperation of a losing power willing to risk everything. These weren't just machines. They were the product of brilliant engineering, industrial might, and human courage and sacrifice on all sides. Today, many of these aircraft survive only in museums and photographs, but their legacy lives on in every jet fighter, every transport plane, and every helicopter flying today. This has been Every German Aircraft of World War II. Thanks for watching.